April 1945, World War II is nearly over, and the mighty Axis powers are collapsing. Adolf Hitler is trapped in his Berlin bunker, days away from taking his own life. In Italy, his closest ally, Benito Mussolini, is desperately fleeing for survival. Once hailed as Il Duce, Mussolini was the face of fascism, the self-proclaimed savior of Italy. He ruled with an iron fist, silencing opposition, expanding his military ambitions, and forging a deadly alliance with Nazi Germany. For over 2 decades, he commanded fear and admiration, dreaming of rebuilding a new Roman Empire. But by 1945, his empire had crumbled. Italy had turned against him. The people who once cheered his name now wanted him dead. On April 27, 1945, Mussolini, disguised in a German soldier's coat, attempted to escape to Switzerland alongside his mistress, Clara Petacci. But fate had other plans. Near the town of Dongo, Italian partisans stopped his convoy and immediately recognized him. The once powerful dictator surrendered without a fight, knowing his fate was sealed. Less than 24 hours later, Mussolini and Petacci were taken to the small village of Giulino di Mezzegra, where they were executed by a firing squad. But the humiliation didn't end there. Their lifeless bodies were dragged through the streets, spat on, beaten, and hung upside down at a gas station in Milan, on public display for the world to see. How did Mussolini's rule collapse so dramatically? What led to his gruesome execution? Today, we uncover the shocking and brutal downfall of one of history's most infamous dictators. To understand the shocking end of Benito Mussolini, we have to go back to the beginning. Born in 1883, Mussolini's rise to power was nothing short of dramatic. A fiery and charismatic speaker, he founded the National Fascist Party in 1919, promising to restore Italy's former glory. His black-shirted paramilitary squads crushed opposition, and by 1922, he had forced King Victor Emmanuel III to appoint him as prime minister. For years, Mussolini ruled Italy with an iron fist. He abolished democracy, silenced critics, and expanded Italy's influence. His dream was to create a new Roman Empire, an empire that would rival Britain and France. But his ambition led to reckless decisions. In 1935, he invaded Ethiopia, drawing international condemnation. Then, in 1940, he made the fateful decision to ally with Adolf Hitler in World War II. At first, it seemed like a winning move. Germany's war machine was unstoppable, and Mussolini saw a chance to carve out a vast Italian empire. But reality hit hard. Italy's military was weak, underprepared, and poorly equipped. Campaigns in North Africa, Greece, and the Soviet Union ended in disaster. By 1945, the Allies had invaded Sicily, and Mussolini's own government turned against him. King Victor Emmanuel III had him arrested and removed from power. Italy surrendered to the Allies, and Mussolini, once the proud dictator, became a prisoner on an isolated mountaintop. But Hitler wasn't about to let his closest ally fall so easily. In a daring rescue mission, German commandos freed Mussolini and installed him as the leader of a Nazi-controlled puppet state in northern Italy, the Italian Social Republic. However, Mussolini was no longer in control. He was just a figurehead, a puppet of Nazi Germany. As the war turned against Hitler, Mussolini knew his time was running out. By April 1945, the Allies were advancing, and Mussolini's forces were crumbling. His only chance was escape. Benito Mussolini's dream of escape ended the moment his convoy was stopped near Dongo, Italy, on April 27, 1945. Disguised in a tattered German soldier's coat, he had hoped to slip past unnoticed, making his way to Switzerland, where he could seek asylum or regroup with the last remnants of Nazi forces. But there would be no second chance. The Italian partisans were waiting. When the partisans searched the convoy, Mussolini was immediately recognized. Alongside him, his mistress, Clara Petacci, who had refused to leave his side, was also taken into custody. The dictator, once paraded through Italy as a godlike figure, was now paraded through the streets as a prisoner. There were no crowds yet, no jeering mobs, only a quiet, eerie realization that his end was near. That night, the partisans debated his fate. Some believed he should stand trial, while others argued that a trial would only give him a platform to speak once more. The decision was made swiftly. Mussolini had to die. At dawn on April 28, 1945, a car carrying Mussolini and Petacci arrived in Giulino di Mezzegra, a quiet village near Lake Como. The two were led to a small farmhouse standing against an old stone wall. Clara clung to Mussolini, pleading for his life, but there was no mercy. The executioner, Walter Audicio, raised his submachine gun. The first shots were for Clara. Mussolini, silent and resigned to his fate, was next. A burst of gunfire tore through his body, and Il Duce fell, not in a grand battle, but against a farmhouse wall in the cold morning light. Mussolini did not beg, he did not plead, he did not try to escape. The man who once commanded crowds with his booming voice now stood silent, stripped of power, stripped of authority, stripped of everything. There was no last speech, no defiant gesture, no final act of rebellion. He simply waited. But Clara Petacci, his devoted mistress, refused to accept fate so quietly. She clung to Mussolini, weeping, pleading, begging the partisans to spare his life. Her voice cracked with desperation, but her cries fell on deaf ears. The executioner, Walter Audicio, stepped forward. His orders were clear. Mussolini must die. The first shots were not for Mussolini, but for Clara. Bullets tore through her as she gasped, her body jerking violently before crumpling to the ground beside him. Then came Mussolini's turn. More shots rang out, ripping into the man who once saw himself as the new Caesar, the ruler of a modern Roman Empire. His body lurched under the impact before collapsing in a lifeless heap, blood pooling in the dust beneath him. The execution was swift. The dictator was dead. There was no ceremony, no dignity in death, only the echo of gunfire and the vengeful satisfaction of those who had suffered under his rule. In mere seconds, the man who had once ruled Italy with an iron fist was nothing more than a corpse, a symbol of fascism's violent and humiliating end. Mussolini's execution was swift, but his punishment was far from over. His lifeless body, along with that of Clara Petacci and several executed fascist officials, was thrown into the back of a truck. But they weren't being taken for burial. They were being taken for something far worse, a final act of public humiliation. The truck made its way to Milan, stopping at Piazzale Loreto, a place deeply symbolic in Italy's war-torn history. Just a year earlier, Mussolini's regime had executed 15 Italian partisans in this very square, leaving their bodies on display as a warning to others. Now it was his turn. The corpses were dumped onto the ground like garbage, and in an instant, chaos erupted. A furious mob had been waiting for this moment. Civilians, resistance fighters, even former fascist supporters who had now turned against him, rushed forward. They spat on Mussolini's corpse, kicked it, and hurled insults. Some even fired more bullets into his lifeless body, ensuring that Il Duce would never rise again. But the crowd wanted more. They wanted a final display, a symbolic act that would erase Mussolini's legacy once and for all. His body, along with Petacci's and the others, was hauled up by its feet, strung from a metal beam at a gas station for the world to see. Hanging upside down, his face swollen and bloodied, the once mighty dictator had been reduced to nothing. The image became one of the most infamous photographs in history, a final warning to those who sought to follow in his footsteps. Mussolini had dreamed of a glorious empire, but in the end, he found only disgrace, death, and an unmarked grave. Mussolini's death sent shockwaves across the world. The dramatic fall of the once powerful dictator, executed and publicly humiliated by his own people, served as a chilling warning to other tyrants. News of his fate spread quickly, reaching Adolf Hitler in his Berlin bunker. Seeing his Italian allies' brutal end, captured, shot, and strung up for the world to mock, Hitler knew he could not allow himself to suffer the same humiliation. Just 2 days later, on April 30th, 1945, he chose to take his own life, sealing the fate of the Axis powers. Even in death, Mussolini remained a controversial figure. His corpse, meant to be buried in an unmarked grave to prevent his legacy from being glorified, was stolen by fascist loyalists in 1946. For months, it remained hidden, moving from one secret location to another, until authorities recovered it. The Italian government, unsure of how to handle his remains, kept them hidden for years before finally returning them to his family. Today, Mussolini lies in his hometown of Predappio, Italy, where his tomb continues to draw visitors. Some come out of curiosity, others to denounce him. But disturbingly, many still honor his memory, keeping his legacy alive in ways that many find unsettling. His dream of a new Roman Empire was shattered. His fascist ideology was rejected. His rule ended not in glory, but in blood and disgrace. His final chapter a stark reminder of the fate that awaits those who abuse power. Benito Mussolini's rise to power was built on fear, propaganda, and absolute control. For over 2 decades, he ruled Italy with an iron fist, believing himself to be invincible, untouchable, and destined for greatness. But in the end, his fall was swift and merciless. He was abandoned by his allies, despised by his people, and left with nowhere to run. His desperate attempt to escape ended in capture, execution, and public humiliation. A fate more brutal than he could have ever imagined. The man who once demanded loyalty from millions was now spat on, kicked, and strung up for the world to see. Mussolini's execution was not just the death of a dictator. It was the death of an era. The fascist dream he built collapsed in blood and disgrace, leaving behind a scarred and broken Italy. His gruesome end served as a powerful message, a warning to those who seek to rule through oppression. But even today, Mussolini's legacy remains controversial. Some see him as a tyrant, a ruthless dictator who led Italy to ruin. Others still view him as a leader who sought to restore Italian pride. His tomb in Predappio continues to attract visitors, proving that history is never truly forgotten. The story of Benito Mussolini is a lesson in power, ambition, and downfall. No empire is eternal, no ruler is invincible, and in the end, history always delivers justice. If you found this deep dive into history fascinating, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking historical events. And remember, history never forgets.